Hello there, YouTube. Thanks to everybody who stopped by, kicking it with us here on the YouTube Pick Six Podcast YouTube channel. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and turn on alerts. That way you'll know if we're going to go live at 2 o'clock instead of 1 o'clock because you'll get an alert, or 2 at 5. Like right now, I just got an alert. It says watch live now. Pick Six Podcast, best quarterback seasons of all time. Turn on alerts. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Brinson. I'm your host. It is Tuesday, June 14th. If you are listening to the podcast, if you're watching on our YouTube channel, we are live every day for the rest of time. Just kidding. But Monday, June 13th, if you are watching on the YouTubes, and we're going to talk about the best quarterback seasons ever because it's the off season, and this is what we do in the offseason. You got to go back and look back at historical stuff, and who better to do it than senior historical NFL analyst or senior NFL historian at CBSSports.com, who was promoted by me last week. Bryan DeArdo, what's up, buddy? How you doing?
I'm doing good. Well, I am not the CBS Sports NFL golf expert because I golfed a lot during my recent vacation, and now I did get my first career par.
There you go.
Now it was on the short course, but there's no asterisk next to it. But
where'd you play golf?
Oh, just a local course down the street, Blackwood, which is it's actually close to Murfield, where the memorial is every year.
Yeah,
but this one's free to play, and that one is not. So I like the free course.
To play.
It's free to play if you live in that county. So yeah. So as you can imagine, it's pretty busy.
Crowded.
It's pretty crowded, but yeah, it's been fun. But I'm going to imagine you're the best golfer among the CBS NFL staff, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I would think so amongst the NFL staff. Although, like, if we're including like Prisco, I've beaten Prisco, but he's beaten me. Actually, he beat me the only time we played because he's the worst human being alive. Brady Quinn and Danny Cannell are probably better than I am, though.
Nice.
Maybe Chris Hassel. I don't know if he counts.
Who do you know who the best NFL golfer is? I know this is not our list, but like, who do you think is the best? Is it? I think it's Rodgers. I mean, Rodgers was the best in that tournament that just happened.
Rodgers is definitely up there. I think Mahomes is pretty good too. There's a bunch of like players you'd be shocked at who are just like these dudes just play a ton of golf.
Right.
This like the American Century Championship.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Who's the Eagle that's so good?
No, it's another friend of the show. Adam Thielen finished one among active players last year, and then Pat P finished number 2 among active players.
Pat P, a very good golfer.
Thielen is apparently like really good.
Yeah.
See, maybe this could be what we do for the Pro Bowl, right? We just have. I would watch a golf tournament with the NFL Pro Bowlers. I 1,000,000% would.
I'd cover it too, especially if it was in Hawaii.
I would try. I would try to do it for sure.
Absolutely. All right, let's in fact, all the guys on this list I think are pretty good golfers. Just
there we go.
Peyton Manning and Tom Brady's probably one of the best. No, Tom Brady's like a 15 handicap or something like that. 10 handicap maybe. Anyway, best seasons ever by a quarterback. So this is like all time.
Yeah, this is all time. So
I know it's all time. I'm just establishing the criteria. So it's like it's probably worth noting that there's no chance in hell we're going to get a quarterback season. Like the earliest one is 1989. Oh no, sorry. There's nothing before the 80s.
Right.
Because there just aren't statistically the big enough numbers there to make it work. There's going to be a lot of modern guys. Did you decide, because I think you said this when we were talking about the was it the greatest offenses last week?
Last QBs by decade. Best
QBs by decade. Right. God, sorry. My brain's been fried. Did you decide to go only one season for each quarterback?
You know what's funny, Will? I didn't because it kind of just organically kind of
what happened
this way. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so like for instance, okay, but I believe there are no multiple quarterback seasons on here, right?
There are not. No. So maybe subconsciously, but to me, I feel like this one was so much more wide open.
Right.
Like, and so for me, this was oh no, I did do one spot per minute.
Yeah, I think you must have, because there would have been.
I'm getting the list mixed up in my head. Yeah, we did do one spot per quarterback. Like you said, because then Brady could be 4 or 5 of them.
Exactly. Peyton Manning could easily have 4.
Right.
So in other words, like Peyton Manning gets one spot on this list.
Right.
You picked out Peyton Manning's best season, and then you slotted where his best season goes amongst all the other quarterbacks' best seasons. And that becomes like an interesting secondary debate too, DeArdo, because it's like some people might say, and we'll start at 10, Aaron Rodgers checks in at number 10, his 2020 season.
Right.
Obviously, one MVP, first of two back-to-back MVPs. It was the second season with Matt LaFleur. It was right after they drafted Jordan Love. It was a total FU season to a lot of people. I think that maybe you would get some pushback that his 2011 season was better. What gave you, what was the edge for 2020 over 2011 or even 2014, I guess, the other two MVP seasons outside of the last two?
Well, I mean, so when I list, the criteria, postseason success is, or just overall team success is part of it. So the 2011 team went 15-1, which was phenomenal, but then they got, beaten pretty soundly by Manning in the 9-7 Giants in the playoffs. So, that was kind of part of it. Plus, when you look at like the entire arsenal that Rodgers had in 11, he was coming off his MVP season or his Super Bowl winning season. And that offense at that time was humming. And, their strength of opponent that year wasn't that great either. 14 was really good as well. But I think in 2020, I think what really pushed it over for me was and correct me if I'm wrong, I just feel like that year he kind of really claimed his mark. Like he was the emphatic MVP that season. I remember in 2020, like, and again, I feel like 19, he was coming off Matt LaFleur, his first season with Matt LaFleur, and his numbers for Rodgers standards in 19 were kind of pedestrian. They got killed by the Niners in the NFC Championship game. So there was kind of this narrative that like maybe Rodgers was starting to fall a little bit. Kind of similar to like Brady, like 2013, 2014.
No, Rodgers was done. The Packers drafted Jordan Love because they thought Rodgers was, there's no, it's not even like a narrative. I mean, like it definitely is a narrative in the sense that people were talking about it, but the Packers drafted Jordan Love. They expressly stated their belief that Aaron Rodgers was on the decline. There is 0.0% chance they draft Jordan Love in the first round, much less trade up for him in the first round, if they feel that Aaron Rodgers is about to have two MVP seasons in the coming 2 years.
Right, exactly. And I think, one of the things that we talk about, and again, I think this season will age well. And again, we discussed this the last time I was on the show, his ability to not throw picks. And that's not a knock. It's just, it is what it is. 48 touchdowns and 5 picks is kind of what sealed the deal for me. And along with the fact that he led the league in completion percentage at 70%, but I just think that the 48 and the 5 and the fact that, he led the Packers back to an NFC Championship game and played well in that game, except for, and this is probably why it's down at 10 and it's not higher, is the fact that his most famous play that season is probably the third down indecision against Tampa Bay. The fact that he didn't know what to do and he kind of just threw it in the traffic and it was incomplete and they lose that game. So yeah, I mean, I just think for him, the fact that they kind of buried him, he came back and again, he was the hands down unanimous league MVP that year. Not to mention that it was during COVID when that whole season was just kind of crazy, with all the protocols. We were having games on Monday afternoon when usually Wheel of Fortune's on. Like we had all the weirdness of 2020. But the main constant was Rodgers. And again, I think, and he had a few games that year that were just nuts. I mean, he had 305 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Niners in one game, 81% completion percentage in that game. And just, I mean, again, I think if you said to me, give me one Aaron Rodgers season that just kind of would sum it up to somebody that didn't see him 50 years from now, I point to 2020. And that was the reason why it was number 10.
No, that's that. Look, hey, it's your list. I would take 2011, I think, just because it was when you watched him in 2011. Coming and look, I'm second year covering the NFL for CBS in 2011. Coming off my first time at a Super Bowl. I mean, much less covering a Super Bowl or much less at a whatever it is. And Rodgers won that Super Bowl, and then like just the way they just burnt the league to the ground in 2011. Right. But you're right, the competition not that stiff that season, and like the guy he had Jordy Nelson. He had Donald Driver on the back end of his career at 36, but Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, Randall Cobb, Jermichael Finley, Ryan Grant, James Starks, that was a really loaded Packers offense. And so, yes, I think you can make the case that in 2020, maybe doing more with less. And I do like the FU factor of 2020 because he was toast, man.
One last thing too. I think Matt Flynn started the last game for the Packers that season, 2011. I think he had 6 touchdowns in that game.
He did.
Right. So it's kind of like, I'm not saying that should be a knock on Rodgers, but it's kind of to our point about how dominant that offense was.
That's how Matt Flynn got paid, buddy. Because remember, the Seahawks gave all that cash, and then they drafted Russell Wilson, and Matt Flynn never started a game for him.
Right. Yeah. So that didn't hurt 2020's cause either.
Yeah, that's true. And look, like they went 13-3 in 2019. But it didn't feel like Rodgers was Aaron Rodgers. And then he was in 2020 when he obviously won MVP. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think any of those 3 seasons, I certainly think 2020 was better than 2021. I mean, he's still very good last year, but 2020 clearly better. I would probably take 2011 and I'm trying to think. Oh, 2014 was the relaxed season, right?
Yes. They started like 1-2 or something like that. And
they started 1-2, and everybody freaked out.
Yep.
And then they lost 1 game down the stretch and just obliterated. Yeah.
The
20. Oh God, that's right. The 2014 season was when they lost at Seattle in the conference championship game. The game they just had no business losing.
Right.
After that crazy game against Dallas. Yeah. I mean, the playoffs are tough.
This is more legacy talk, Will. But like, how do you think Rodgers' career is going to be remembered if he only in quotes, if he only wins 1 championship?
Almost identically to Brett Favre.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, bunch of MVPs, Packers wins, 1 Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Let's move along. But yeah, I mean, for sure. All right. This is kind of a shocker, I think. Number 9. In fact, we do 9 and 8 because we get 2020 and then 2019 and 2018. Lamar Jackson at number 9, 2019, and Patrick Mahomes at 8 at 2018. Again, these are the top 10 greatest quarterback seasons of all time. I'm probably moving Rodgers above Lamar. As good as that season was for Lamar in 2019, I'll take 11 Rodgers over Lamar. If I was reslotting those 3, I'm probably putting Rodgers at 9, Lamar at 10. But like Lamar's 2019, I mean, it's ridiculous. You have to include the rushing, obviously. But he ran for 1,200 yards. It's insane. He passed for 3,000 yards and ran for 1,200. Like that's never been done before, and led the league in passing touchdowns.
Yeah, and similar to Rodgers, where we knew he was great, but he was kind of coming off that. His 2020 season was kind of surprising. It kind of. Again, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it was surprising. Lamar's 19. You saw flashes at the end of 18 when he replaced Flacco, but there were still questions. Then he comes out right away, as you can see here if you're watching on YouTube. I mean, the 5 touchdowns right off the bat against a Miami team that may or may not have been playing for Tua, but that's neither here nor there. But
I mean, he got 59 points on Miami in the opener. Like it was he threw 20 passes and 5 touchdowns.
Right. And then when you look at the rest of if you look at the rest of the quarterbacks on this list, 3,100 passing yards is relatively low, but to 1,200 rushing yards, led the league with a 6 yards per carry average. And the 1,200 rushing yards was like what, 17, 16, or 160 more rushing yards than Vic, who was
it's the first ever 3K, 1K season.
Right.
And he led the league in rushing yards per rush attempt.
Right.
At 6.9 and led the league in passing touchdowns. Like that's a banana stat. Like that, like to lead the league in passing touchdowns and yards per rush, and to have over 1,000. I mean, like that's it was a crazy season.
And that's why he's on the list. And that's why this season's on the list, because it's just a truly unique season where a guy leads, like I call it the triple crown for quarterbacks. If you lead the NFL in completion percentage, passing yards, and touchdown passes, only one guy on this list from this season actually hits the triple crown. Drew Brees, who's honorable mention for his 11 season, also hit the triple.
Drew Brees didn't make the list, did he? Wow.
11 didn't make it. I just, we can talk about that if you want.
We got too many. Is that me?
That's me. I can figure out how to mute that. But they told me it's Flag Day, so I got.
Very important.
It's very important on this podcast. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think that season had any staying power. And then you look at like the numbers Brady put up at 11, the numbers that season, for whatever reason, it was a big season for quarterbacks. And so it doesn't, in my opinion, it's like, it wasn't like Marino in 84 where like he did all this. And like, so yeah, that was the reason why. But But for Lamar, it was just a truly unique season. And it kind of like opened up people's eyes to, you know what, like a guy, somebody can succeed playing the position differently than it had previously been played. I mean, that game that he had against the Rams, where he had 5 touchdown passes and 95 rushing yards, like,
right.
And they won 45-6. He had 8 games with 3 touchdown passes. And it wasn't like he was throwing to Jerry Rice and John Taylor. I mean, Hollywood Brown, I think, was a rookie that season. Mark Andrews was a tight end. Willie Snead, as a guy that watched a lot of AFC North football that year, had a good season for Lamar. But, obviously, and even in their playoff loss to the Titans, had 365 yards passing, had 143 yards rushing. It was his turnovers that contributed to that loss. But, yeah, it was a season that we haven't seen before or since, and I thought that deserved a place on the list.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a part of a really back-to-back breakout or like surprising MVP winners, because we had Rodgers in 20. Everybody was looking for like the next young quarterback in his second year. As it turns out, it was just Rodgers in the second year of that system in 20, Lamar in the second year with the Ravens with Greg Roman's system. And then, of course, in 2018, Patrick Mahomes checks in at number 8 here with his 50 touchdown, 5,000 yard season, completed 66% of his passes, played all 16 games that year, 12-4 for the Chiefs, just 12 interceptions, led the league, and had 8.8 yards per attempt, 9.6 adjusted yards per attempt, which led the league, and like swept, not even close, who was the MVP that year. It was honestly, we talked about a little bit, like since then, not like Mahomes has been bad. He's been great, but like that year really almost set the bar too high for Patrick Mahomes in terms of what people expected from him.
So I'm probably one of the worst fantasy players ever. An example, I traded Jonathan Taylor and Tom Brady this season.
Very impressive. That's terrible.
That's yeah. And
terrible.
I got Stafford to replace Brady, but I don't recall what I got for Taylor. It wasn't worth that. All that being said, I did draft Mahomes going into 18, even though he didn't start the previous year and Alex Smith was the starter. To me, I just thought that a quarterback in Andy Reid's system is probably going to be good. And if they're willing to let Smith go, then Mahomes must be pretty good, because, Smith had 5, had a run in Kansas City that was pretty impressive. Now, I don't think I absolutely didn't see that happening. And I want to say his breakout performance that year was against Pittsburgh in week 2. He had 4 touchdowns and a close win over the Chargers in week 1. But I think that got like some murmurs. I'm sure we wrote some stories about it. I wasn't here at the time, but I'm sure we did. I think the game that really got people's heads to turn was Pittsburgh the next week, because the Steelers just come off their 13-3 season. I actually, old tweets exposed. The Steelers in week 1 had tied the Browns, who had won 1 game the previous 2 years. Mahomes comes in the next week. They're up 21-0 at the end of the first quarter. I tweeted that day, at this point in time, the Steelers are the NFL's worst team. They just tied the Browns, and they're down 21-0 at home in week 2. And at that point, they probably were. I don't recall, but and then Ben kind of turned it on, and they had a shootout. But like that day, Mahomes threw for 6 touchdowns, and it was just like, and the way that he attacked, how fast he threw, how fearless he was.
All different arm angles, the whole.
It was bonkers, and it really set the table to what he did that season. I mean, 10 games, at least 3 touchdowns, 13 touchdowns his first 3 starts. He had that crazy game against the Rams where he had 6 touchdowns, in that game in the Coliseum. 50 touchdowns, 5,000 yards. I mean, those are just 2 milestones that how many guys have ever done that? I mean, just a handful, and they're all on this list. I mean, guys ahead of him on this list. Didn't win a championship, which is why he's not higher.
Sure.
So I mean, if the 18 season ended the way that 19 did for Mahomes, it would be a top 4 thing, right? If they ended this year with a championship, this would have been in the Mount Rushmore of best quarterback seasons. The fact that it was next year makes it, a little bit lower.
Yeah, that's fair. You want to have the title in there, which Brett Favre got in 1996. I think it's hard to compare these. You're talking about like the 90s versus the early 2000s versus the early 2010s versus late 2010s, where it's just like now anybody can throw for 5,000 yards. Like any 5,000 yard passer should not surprise you at this point. Right. Favre in 96, 3,899 passing yards, 39 touchdowns, 13 picks. He also won a Super Bowl, of course, and won the MVP that season. I mean, certainly like a monster year, clearly. But I mean, like he completed less than 60% of his passes, but it was also 1996. So that's why it is a little tough with the, you're talking apples, oranges, etc.
Yeah, and Favre's actually the season that bumped Brees off. Because I was not going to have this season make it. And as we kind of said on the start of the show, these numbers on these lists, they have to compete with modern day stats, in which Favre just does not, as you just said, not 4,000 yards, not 60% completion. So, because like, for example, I wanted Bradshaw's 78 season to make this list. He was league MVP and Super Bowl MVP that year. But when I look at it, the numbers, 28 touchdowns, 20 interceptions, I'm like, I'm not putting that on a list. I just can't. I just cannot. So Favre makes it, even though, his numbers don't really age that great, but 39 touchdowns, that still resonates. That was a good, and the fact that he was in the middle of his 3 consecutive MVP seasons. And really, this is where the championship's really important. If Favre didn't, because I think Favre's 95 season was much more impressive. I think his 07 season was much more impressive. His 09 season in Minnesota is much more impressive. But I think anybody, and this is the hard part, which really makes this list tough, is, and just as you said, Will, like you were on staff here in 11, I wasn't. So you probably appreciate Rodgers' 11 season more than I do. If you were alive and were watching football in 1996, you knew how good Brett Favre was. You knew how dominant that Packers offense was. And so it makes a lot of sense for us with that information to put Favre at 7 or wherever he is on this list, even though, his numbers aren't fantastic. And we discussed on your previous show, he had a lot of receivers that were hurt at stretches during that season.
That's right.
And still had 10 touchdowns in his first 3 games and went through the playoffs and had, 3 touchdowns against a Parcells Belichick coach defense in the Super Bowl, which really topped it off for me. What he did in that Super Bowl, even though he didn't win MVP, that really topped it off for me for him to make the list.
And you could honestly go with 95 too if you wanted to for Favre's best season. 13-3, win the Super Bowl. And look, I think that's important to note when we talk about this list too. It's like the Super Bowl matters a lot. Like if you win a championship, you are, team success and how deep you can go in the playoff matters a lot for this list. Like you can move up, but if you win the Super Bowl as a result of a great season that culminates with that Super Bowl, as you like, just pointing out the differences, with like a Mahomes in 2018, and Favre in 96. Like those are just 2 hard seasons that are really difficult to compare because 1996, it wasn't like, you're not getting, nobody's doing 1-yard shovel passes, for touchdowns.
Right.
Like Patrick Mahomes did several times with Tyreek Hill. And a great offensive design by Andy Reid. You minimize, the possibility of fumbling near the goal line. You get the ball, horizontally in your best player. I'm not ripping the play. It's just Brett Favre didn't have those.
Right.
Like that makes a difference. And it's just easier to complete passes now than it was back in the day. Another guy from the 90s who almost won 3 straight MVPs, Steve Young, won it in 92, just missed in 93, and won it in 94, which is the season that you're giving him the number 6 all-time quarterback season, 70.3% completion percentage, 3,969 yards, 35 touchdowns, 10 picks, led the league with 8.6 yards per attempt, 9.2 adjusted yards per attempt. Oh, and Steve Young, you always got to mention his I actually didn't run that much. Only 58 carries for 293 yards, but 7 touchdowns that season on the ground as well.
Yeah. And really, his numbers still largely add up. I mean, 35 touchdown passes might be a little low, but the 70% completion percentage, the 7 rushing touchdowns, and just that season. I mean, I love, and this is the part I think that made Young and those Niners teams coached by Mike Shanahan so good, was how much, Young spread the wealth. Brett Jones had 9 touchdowns as tight end. John Taylor had 5 touchdowns as number 2 receiver. Ricky Watters, a running back, had 66 catches. And I mean, we remember when Ricky Watters played. It's kind of surprising he hasn't had more Hall of Fame hub. Had he stayed in San Francisco, he probably, would have. Young's also a left-handed quarterback, which, we don't really see that very often either. But, he just put it all together that season.
66 catches for a running back on a team with Jerry Rice is pretty wild. In 19,
yeah, it is. Yeah. And there's a few games that season that really kind of like sum up like how good Steve Young was back then. He had played the Rams that year, completed 80% of his passes, 355 yards, 2 touchdown passes, 2 touchdown runs. If that happened in today's times, we'd be, that would be kind of the highlight of the week. Or against the Falcons that year, he threw for about 300 yards, 5 total touchdowns. And yeah, he was dangerous with his legs, even though at that point he was more of an advanced stage in his career in terms of age. And yeah, I mean, he ended the Cowboys, reign atop the NFL. They had won 2 in a row. He had the couple clinching touchdowns in that championship game. And then, and again, we talk legacy, that Super Bowl, he still has the record for touchdown passes in a Super Bowl with 6. He also was the Super Bowl's leading rusher in that game with 49 yards. So yeah, just in terms of how well this season has aged, legacy, that changed Steve Young's legacy as a guy that, probably might be in the Hall of Fame if he doesn't have a ring on his resume, but I think needed one. Maybe he would have been the Phillip Rivers of that era if he didn't win a ring. So he's able to get that ring and get that notoriety.
Ring as a starter, that is, because he obviously had, he won 2 with.
Well, as a starter, sure, right.
Yeah. Those only ones that count. But I think one other stat that's interesting about the '94 Steve Young season is that Elvis Grbac. So Steve Young played all 16 games, started all 16, never got injured. Grbac attempted 50 passes.
Man,
and 8 of them came in a week 5 loss, a blowout loss to the Eagles. They lost 40-8. The reason I bring that up is that if your starter plays all 16 games and your backup attempts 50 passes, it means your backup played a pretty decent amount of time.
Right.
And the reason you look at some of these scores, 42-3, 41-16, 37-22, 50-14, 38-15, 42-19. They didn't have a playoff game that was within double digits. They scored 44, 38, and 49. They obliterated people. Like, they were a really, really dominant team. And it's because Steve Young was running that Bill Walsh offense and that Mike Shanahan offense too. It was. So, Seifert was a coach in '94, excuse me.
Right, yeah. Shanahan was the OC.
Shanahan was OC, right. Yeah.
Shanahan was mad that Young only threw 6 in that game because they wanted he wanted 8. He wanted 8, and Young had 4 in the first half. And Rice was actually hurt in that game. He suffered a shoulder injury at one point in that game. And when they kind of dialed it back a little bit in the second half, and Mike Shanahan was upset with Young. But again, interesting though. We talk Rodgers, we talk Young, we talk Favre, guys here with 1 championship, which is kind of interesting. And I think it's also just a testament to Tom Brady, the fact that he has 7. And and I just think for Young, I think it's important to have a Young season on this list. I just think that, he changed the game in terms of how we look at it with efficiency and how, spreading the wealth of an offense, having multiple, look at the Bengals last year. They had 3 1,000-yard receivers, and Young was, I think, really one of the first quarterbacks to really, beat teams by dissecting them and not just throwing over the top to the same guy numerous times.
Yeah. And it is interesting too, because he really didn't become a full-time starter until his 30s.
Right.
It's which is just, he had a chance to start in Tampa Bay, I guess, but 2-12 in his one big season there before, landing in San Francisco. It's just crazy that he was in San Francisco for that long before he actually, ended up becoming a Hall of Fame caliber starter and winning a Super Bowl. And if he doesn't win a Super Bowl with San Francisco, I think people probably at least, even 2 MVPs, they're at least all right, Montana, we could have, was it worth it? Was it worth it to move on from Joe Montana if Steve Young doesn't win a Super Bowl?
Not to mention that this is the weirdest part. I didn't know this till I watched that Montana documentary recently. This is the weirdest thing. So Montana goes to the Chiefs in '93. They beat Young and the Niners in the '94 season. So then Montana retires after that year, and the Niners throw him a retirement party outside, almost like a parade, like a Super Bowl championship. And there's all these fans there. Carmen Policy that worked in the Niners front office is there. So I think DeBartolo was there, and the fans are chanting 1 more year. It's like, Steve Young just won you a Super Bowl. That is, and even Young in this documentary, he cries, 30 years later, whatever it is, still reliving how the end of his time with the 49ers went. And so, yeah, to your point, that was contentious. It was weird. And I guess with free agency now, more modern situation was Garoppolo and Brady, where, but Belichick traded him because it was he lost the battle with, the opposite thing happened versus the Niners, where the Niners decided we're going to go with the young guy.
Right.
Robert Kraft pretty much said, I'm not ready to let go of Tom yet. We're going to make sure that he stays. But yeah, pretty fascinating that just how that whole thing played out. But as you said,
it's like Rodgers and Favre. I mean, like in the, with the benefit of 10 to 20 years, away from it, or in this case, obviously even much more than that, 30 plus, it seems a lot less like insane just what was going on. But at the time, like if you were there and you were watching it, it was crazy what was going on. Where does Joe Montana land on this list? We will tell you next.
Praise Jesus.
So quiet. I don't know what that Paramount Plus ad was for. You could have seen a fantastic Paramount Plus ad if you're watching on YouTube, though. YouTube.com/pick6. If you're watching on the YouTube, hit the subscribe button, turn on alerts, and press that like button. Tell us your favorite quarterback season of all time in the comments. Number 5, I mentioned Joe Montana and Steve Young. Joe Montana edges out Steve Young. He comes in 1989 season for Joe Montana, the 5th greatest season of all time for you, DeArdo.
And real quick, Will, I'm going to ask you now, so you have time to think about it for the rest of the show. Your favorite quarterback season, and you don't have to give me an answer now, but maybe later we'll revisit it. I know mine right away. So, but let's get to Joe Montana here. One little nugget I had when I looked up Montana, he never led the NFL in passing yards, which I kind of surprised me when you look at like all the kind of Hall of Fame quarterbacks. They usually did it at least once. Montana never did, but he also played when Dan Fouts played, and Dan Marino, and guys that put the ball up a lot more than him. But yeah, I think for Joe Montana, there's one thing about this season that really stands out, because his regular season numbers aren't great. 3,500 yards, 28 touchdowns, 8 picks. It really doesn't stick out from that standpoint, but look at the playoffs. 800 passing yards.
That is a wild number to have in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think is it 11 or 8 touchdowns? I think it's 11 touchdowns.
It was 11.
Yeah, no interceptions. Completion percentage 78.3.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's
like a decent like quarter of a season. Like, I mean, if you're first in the MVP balloting.
Yeah,
3 games of the season if you have those numbers.
Right. I just think when I like, as I wanted, I really, I mean, again, I'm not going to force it. Like I wanted Bradshaw's 78 season, but I couldn't force it on the list. Like I kind of forced Favre on a little bit, but I can defend the reason why he made it. I really wanted a Montana season. There really wasn't one that stuck out. Like I think my options were probably this one and 84 when he beat Marino in the Super Bowl and had a great, but the stats weren't really awesome that
he didn't lead the league in anything and wasn't even in the MVP race really, which is kind of crazy.
Exactly. But when I saw his playoff results,
I think 70.2% completions in 1989 is just outrageous.
Yeah, that's
3,500 yards is a big number, especially for a team that went 11-2 in a 13-game season or 16-game. Wait, he went 11-2. Sorry, did he get hurt? He missed.
Young had to play some games that year.
That's right. Okay.
Elvis Grbac had to play a game that season.
They went 14-2. Like they were. I mean, clearly I would assume they were the 1 seed.
Right.
Yeah, led the league in points scored. And I mean, like when you look at his volume stats, 26 touchdowns, 3,521 yards. Like if he plays the other 3 games, I mean, he won MVP anyway.
Right.
Because he had such a great season, 9.1 yards per attempt. Like it's basically just missing 3 games of production. I mean, tack on his 3 playoff games, right?
Right.
And you're asking a lot because, I mean, one of those games, 9-13, of course, you see that win there on the screen, but like, if you tack on those 3 games and all of a sudden you're at 4,300, like he could have gone for 4,000, like 4,300 passing yards in 1989 would have been insane.
Right. And that's another criteria too. Every quarterback on this list was a league MVP. And that's another one of the reasons why Brees, his 11th season, didn't make it. He wasn't league MVP that year. But like the funny part was, and I know we talk about like the screw you ratio with like Rodgers in 2020. The funny thing with Young and Montana, since we're kind of discussing it, I mean, in 88, Young was pretty close to supplanting Montana because Montana had a shaky 88 season. He was kind of struggling with his health. They had a devastating playoff loss to the Vikings in 13-2, or in 87 when they were 13-2 in the regular season. And Montana played shaky in that game. He was replaced by Young. So Young and Montana are kind of splitting games in 88. And Young was kind of outplaying Montana at a point. They have a 22-0 lead against the Cardinals late in the 88 season. The Cardinals come all the way back and beat them. And Young to this day says that's the reason why I wasn't the starter in 88 on. And I had to wait until like 91. Because after that game, then they lost to the Raiders. They were 6-5. And then they had an in-house meeting, and they were like, after the meeting, they went to Walsh and said, you got to pick a guy. Like, we're done with this. And for whatever reason, he went with Montana. Then they won the Super Bowl that year, and then Montana comes back in 89. And then Walsh retires. Seifert comes in, who's a defensive coach. I think a lot of people assume that maybe the Niners, maybe the win against Cincinnati was kind of it. They're and then they have the 89 season, and then it's like, yeah, maybe not. And then as you can see against the Vikings, they made it a point from when they play the Vikings every game forward that they were going to kind of blow them out. And then the Rams, who were very good that season, with a couple, Kevin Green was on that defense, Hall of Famer. They beat him. And then that Super Bowl was from that point, that 5 touchdown passes, 22 of 29, 297. That's still the largest margin for victory in Super Bowl history. So
that's right.
Yeah. That season really has everything except for maybe gaudier regular season numbers.
Yeah, just missed exactly. But he's still the MVP. I mean, yeah, it's a fantastic season. Number 4. This is up there for me. Kurt Warner in 1999. You have so much going on here. One, you have MVP, Super Bowl MVP. Led the league in passing touchdowns with 41, led the league in completion percentage at 65.1, led the league in yards per attempt 8.7, somehow didn't lead the league in passing yards, quote unquote, just 43-53, still a huge number. And then there's the whole, he wasn't even supposed to play, but Trent Green got hurt and Warner had to step in, and you're thinking this guy is the freaking backup. The greatest show on turf is just, it's dead before it starts, and Warner all of a sudden is just, like basically building what would a Hall of Fame career.
Exactly. And when you look at the legacy factor, they just made a movie about this season.
I mean, it's
kind of like
literally a movie, a Hollywood script.
Right. So you think this season might be a little high, though? You think that?
No. I think this is an incredible season.
Okay. Yeah. Because
the difference is with this season, I think, is that when you take it and place it inside this let's say top 7, because
right.
Well, as we'll get to, like all the top 7 are 8, 9, and 10 are still active.
Right.
Actually, I guess number 3. Okay. There's one more guy who's still active, but we're going to give him a pass because he's Tom Brady. Spoiler.
Right.
Like all these, we're basically looking at these historical seasons, older seasons. And like, I mean, Warner is the one guy who doesn't fit in the pantheon of names that are involved here.
Right.
In other words, relative to his entire career, this season is probably the biggest aberration.
Right.
Versus like Favre or, Manning or, Montana. But like this season was a monster season coming out of nowhere as the backup, a former grocery bagger who won a Super Bowl for the Rams. I mean, and like in a great Super Bowl too, with that, the Kevin Dyson 1-yard short thing.
I think I have to
Kevin Dyson was Kevin Dyson, right?
I think the craziest season, or the most unexpected Super Bowl championship season by a quarterback before this one, was Plunkett in 80. But even then, Plunkett had won the Heisman. You had heard of him. He kind of burnt out with the Patriots. So it was still, and the Raiders had just won a Super Bowl 4 years prior. So it wasn't like a total, it was still a very surprising season, but nothing like Warner. And again, I think now when if you're a 20-year-old and you're watching this show, you see Warner, he's in the Hall of Fame. You see him on NFL Network. You're like, oh, all right, Kurt Warner. Like, what's the surprise? All right, so if you were our age in 99 and you see this guy named Kurt Warner throwing, he was the first quarterback to start his career with 3 touchdown passes in his first 3 starts. You're just like, what's going on here? I think that there's that famous SI article with him throwing, and it's like, who is this guy? He just took the league by storm. The Rams took the league by storm. They were a 4-12 team the year before that, and they were the dreads of the league, and they were able to do that. And largely Marshall Faulk also came there that year too. So it was just a total shift in 1 year from a quarterback nobody knew about, a team nobody cared about, and then all of a sudden they're the greatest show on turf, right? That wasn't intentional, but we'll roll with it. But it just everything about that season was kind of magical. And then you go into the playoffs, and he had 400 yards, roughly 5 touchdowns against the Vikings, and I still remember watching that game when Randy Moss, Chris Carter, and Jeff George was the quarterback in that game, which was odd.
Yep.
Jeff George was the quarterback, and then he has the game-winning touchdown pass in the NFC title game, and then that Super Bowl with the throw to Bruce. I mean, this season has everything. I mean, this season.
And look, that Tampa team in 2000 was a really good Tampa team.
Yes,
like 11-6 was the final score with that. The Rams versus the Bucks in that NFC Championship game. Like that Tampa team was awesome. Could have easily have won the Super Bowl. That Titans team was fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, of winning the Super Bowl, right? I mean, it's like, right. and yeah, I mean, like they went through a really difficult run in the playoffs, and again, he came out of nowhere. He was when Trent Green signed a big, it was a 4-year, $18 million contract with like $5 million signing bonus. It was Trent Green was supposed to be the guy who was going to run, this Dick Vermeil offense. This, oh God, what's his name?
Who's that?
The freaking offensive coordinator. I'm an idiot.
Mike Martz.
Yeah. Geez. All I had was morning wig in my head. I couldn't get it out. Yeah. Like, he was going to run this Mike Martz offense. They were going to dominate and he got hurt. It was like, well, that's it. It's over. And then Warner ran it even better. And yeah, so I have no problem with that. Did
you see the movie?
I have not seen the movie.
I think there was a point in the movie where I looked at
I was expecting it to be a little heavy-handed.
Yeah, I think there's a point in the movie where I think it could have been the top all-time classic. And in my opinion, the momentum at the end kind of sputtered out. And I thought the best moment of the best part of the movie is when he's in the Arena League. Oh, cool. I think that's the best part. And I think after that, it kind of goes downhill. I think the guy that plays Martz is a little too rough. I don't think he was portrayed that well. And the guy that played Marshall Faulk looked like he, let's just say they weren't very kind in the casting with Marshall Faulk from a physical appearance.
Jeez.
So he kind of looked more like a Jerome Bettis and not Marshall Faulk.
That's not very cool. Number 3. We get a little controversy here, I suppose. Maybe. Number 3. Tom Brady at 2007 season. One of the all-time great NFL seasons. Of course, I would guess that Tom Brady and the 2007 Patriots would check in at number 1 if they had beaten the Giants. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Perfect season, and Tom Brady throws for 4,806 passing yards, 50 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, 8.3 yards per attempt. He led the league in completion percentage, passing yards, passing touchdowns, yards per pass attempt, yards per game, quarterback rate, QBR, net yards per attempt, adjusted net yards per attempt, fourth quarter comebacks, game-winning drives, and approximate value. He was, I would have to think, the unanimous MVP. I can't remember the voting in 2007, but I'd be shocked if it was anybody else, unless there was somebody with like some butthurt media member who's like, I can't believe they ran up the score so much.
Yeah.
That was a big
Spygate, all that.
Yeah, stuff. Spygate, all that. 16-0 in the regular season. I mean, I think the only complaint I would have is that, like, are we sure this shouldn't be higher?
Well, it's funny now when we look at Warner. So Warner has the best season of a winning Super Bowl winning quarterback. So the top 3 guys did not win one. So yes, to your point, if Brady wins, they're bumped back up. I would say if there's a knock, or I mean, obviously the reason why they didn't win the Super Bowl and the way they lost is that Brady, his ineffectiveness in that game was a big reason why they lost. And a lot of it wasn't on him, but and I think it was known at that point, but we hadn't seen it on the biggest stage, where if you rush Brady, you can beat him. I mean, and that was the first time we'd seen it in a Super Bowl where Brady's biggest weakness was exploited at the absolute worst time. Once again, it wasn't all him. There's the David Tyree catch for crying out loud, but
right.
And I am going to say it. I do think that the specter of this. I mean, when you think about the 2007 Patriots, I think you kind of think of like 3 things. You think of the loss in the championship after an undefeated regular season. You think about the season that Brady and Moss had, and you think about Spygate. And I think in general, when you look at the Patriots dynasty years later, like, you can't ignore, in my opinion, the Spygate. You can't. And you can't ignore, even though Deflategate was, in my opinion, kind of stupid, like, you can't ignore that it was at least in the air and it was something that was discussed and it wasn't controversy. Right. So to me, it still would be number 1, but I think it's appropriate where it is because there were some, gray marks associated with that season with Spygate and the loss to the Giants.
Yeah, look, I'm telling you, and you go back and look at these scores now, and it's really stupid. It was like 38-14 the first two games, 38-7, 34-13. Like they weren't, maybe it picked up when they went 48-27 against Dallas or 49-28 against Miami or 52-7 against Washington. But like people were, I mean, so I wasn't in college. Anyway, I remember watching this whole season, and, like PTI at the time was like, oh, like, everybody, all the debate shows were like, in every article is like, oh, are the Patriots running it up? Like, should they, is this unsportsmanlike conduct? It's kind of ridiculous in hindsight, but, man, I mean, like this was an all-timer season. I think what's interesting, you mentioned the playoffs, like they beat the Jaguars pretty good. He had completed 93% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, no picks. I mean, crazy. Struggled against the Chargers, and that was the game where Phillip Rivers had the torn ACL and played with like a torn ACL in the AFC Championship game in Foxborough. And that's really the only reason that the Chargers didn't keep it closer. The Pats only scored 21 points. And if Rivers is healthy, who knows what happens there. And then of course they lose to the Giants. So yeah, if we're boosting people for postseason success, then you can certainly move Brady down the list. Number 2, I mean, look, the Tom Brady stands aren't going to like it, but it is what it is. 2013, Peyton Manning. It's crazy because Manning won MVP 4 times before ever going to the Denver Broncos.
Right.
And he missed all. I mean, this is like the peak. This is my peak, like my early years with CBS, right? I mean, this is like, I remember distinctly many things about all of these seasons. Like 2012, he led the league in completion percentage. It was actually number 2 in the MVP race. But there were definitely moments in 2012 where you're like, okay, Manning's back, but a little bit shaky. Has a huge season, 4,659 passing yards. But it's like, all right, maybe he's just going to be just an older version of who he was in Indianapolis, but certainly, we're not going to get back to those, 2004 number style seasons. And then 2013 happened, and he threw for 5,477 yards, 55 touchdowns. Obviously, both led the league. Completed 68.3% of his passes. Somehow didn't lead the league there, and was clearly the MVP of that season. I mean, they didn't win the Super Bowl because Seattle absolutely curb stomped them.
Right.
And I mean, this is 48-3. Like it wasn't
right.
Close. Or 43-8, excuse me. But like this was an all-time season. At one point, DeArdo, I think the Broncos were 28-point favorites against the Jaguars in week 6. That's just how badly they were shredding everybody in their path.
Yeah. Yeah. And
the week before we had that crazy Romo Manning game, 51-48. Right. God, that was a great game.
Right. And that was when Manning had the last rushing touchdown of his career.
That's right.
When he faked everybody else out. But yeah, and that season started with him having 7 touchdowns against Baltimore with Ed Reed and Ray Lewis over there, and had 9 games with at least 4 touchdowns. One thing oddly about
Baltimore, the defending Super Bowl champion, had to go to Denver to play because the Orioles would not move their baseball game.
Is that what I think you need to take the senior historian tag back, Will, because I didn't know that. So
I'm just old.
You got a few bags, you got a few tricks up your sleeve.
That was a huge deal back then. Like the Orioles owner, whatever his name, he's like a cheapskate, but he just would not move the Orioles game.
Okay, well that explains it now, because that's interesting. But I think one of the cool parts about this season was what he did in the AFC Championship game, 400 yards, 2 touchdowns against the Patriots. And, obviously people talk a lot about, I think his overall win-loss record against Brady, and specifically Brady and the Patriots, was a losing record, but he was 3-1 against them in AFC Championships. So, I mean, that's, to me, I don't think that's talked about enough in Manning's legacy. And this game actually was a rout. And then, the Patriots scored a couple of late, scores to make it look more reasonable. But
so all 3 of his Super Bowl, he had 4 Super Bowls, 2 with Denver, 2 with Indy.
09 was the only one that didn't go through.
Okay, didn't go through
a Brady team, right? So 06 they win in that crazy
that
game.
That is a good stat. Like,
yeah, it's
he
a great
gets
stat.
So much for not being able to take care of the Patriots, but he beat 3-1 in AFC Championship games. Ain't bad.
Right. And even the Super Bowl loss to Seattle, like I kind of was like, man, is this really a 2? And a guy, like you said, I like the terminology used, was it some kind of stomped in that game.
Curb stomped. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. That's very accurate. They got curb stomped in that game. And I was kind of like, how much, I know he had the high snap for the safety on the first play that kind of set the tone, but part of me is like, when a team gets blown out that bad, it's like, how much that's actually his fault.
No, that was all. It was just Seattle was like playing like one of the 5 greatest defenses in the history of football.
Right. And I thought it was when a team's dominating like that, it was like kind of similar when Tampa blew out the Chiefs a few years ago. I kind of sit back and marvel. I enjoy the brilliance. I enjoy the dominance. So at some point when a Super Bowl, you realize it's not competitive anymore, I think it's important to sit back and just enjoy what you're watching from the other side. Because and like you said, I mean, the way Seattle played that night, I don't even know if a vintage Manning game could have been able to salvage that one. But
I remember. So like thinking back on it, I was there in New York for it, and they were up 15-0 early in the second quarter, but it like they had the safety, and then they had 2 field goals. And then they scored a touchdown with Marshawn. And so it was 15-0, but it was like completely dominant by Seattle, but it wasn't out of hand at all.
Right.
And then Manning throws a 69-yard pick 6 to Malcolm Smith.
Right.
And then coming out of halftime, Percy Harvin houses the kickoff. And so like if Manning goes down and they score a touchdown, it's like 15-7 or even 15-8, like if they go for 2, whatever, it's a whole different ball game. Like in the blink of an eye, it's 29-0 and the game is over, against a really good defense. So that's
right. And you talk about that. The first Super Bowl Manning lost. What was the play that clinched it? It was his pick 6 to Tracy Porter.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just like, man. So it's like, I find the Brady Manning
is a lot closer to Tom Brady than people give him credit for, but Brady has 7 Super Bowls. So it's just you can't have the discussion.
Yes. Yeah.
And in fact, Brees is probably closer to those guys than he gets credit for too, but you can't.
Yeah. I totally agree with you there for sure.
Another Super Bowl loser who never won a Super Bowl. Tough scene for Dan Marino, but the number 1 all-time quarterback season on your list, widely regarded as, especially if you adjust for era, his second season in the NFL, 1984. I was 3 years old. He threw for 5,084 yards and 48 touchdowns, 9 yards per attempt in 1984, won the MVP, led the league in passing yards, passing touchdowns, and yards per attempt, obviously, and got to the Super Bowl and lost and then never went back, which is unfortunately for Marino, who's one of the most talented passers, maybe the most talented passer of all time. That's just how his legacy is gonna like. That's just how he's remembered.
Yeah.
Everyone knows the Hall of Famer. Everyone knows he's had incredible seasons. But the reality is, when you think about Dan Marino, you think about the fact that he went to a Super Bowl in the second season, won MVP, and everyone was sure he would be back and win a couple.
Right.
And then he never did. And it's always in the back of my mind when I think about like Mahomes or even Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, like you assume Tom Brady has spoiled us into believing that all quarterbacks, like all great quarterbacks, are going to win a bunch of Super Bowls. And that's just not how it happens. I mean, Peyton's second one came, he's a figurehead on that 2015 Broncos team. I
think that's perplexing to Steeler fans about Ben, that he won 2 so early in his career. And then the last 13 years, they didn't win any more.
Yeah.
And when actually he was probably a better quarterback the second half of his career when he didn't win championships. So that just shows you kind of the randomness of it. But I think the thing that kind of, I think it's fitting with Marino and Manning, they're next to each other on this list. And I think maybe the one thing you can say about both is maybe why they didn't have more success in terms of championships is they were both kind of their worst enemy, where you kind of lived and died by the sword. The sword in this case was their arm. You always knew, and Belichick said, and when I've read about it, Belichick always knew late in games, Manning couldn't help himself, except for the 06 game in the AFC Championship game where Manning buckled down and they ran the ball. But largely, the Dolphins were going to win championships or lose them based on Marino throwing. And the same thing with pretty much every team that Manning was on. Brady won his championships, as we all know, because and that's another interesting part when you talk, Manning Brady is that, Manning always tried to get the big contracts to maybe set the standard for quarterbacks after him. And Brady always took team-friendly deals. So
Sure.
at the end of the day, their legacies are different. One is Manning in the money, and one is Brady and what he did with championships. But, Marino's number one largely because this season kind of set the new template of what does an elite quarterback passing season look like. I mean, the 48 touchdowns, that stood for like 20 years. The 4,800 or the 5,084 stood until 2011. So these records stood for 20 and 27 years. So, just that alone, makes it incredibly notable. And then when you look at what he actually did in that season, he had, at least 4 touchdown passes in 6 games. He started the year against Washington, who had been in the last 2 Super Bowls with a 5 touchdown game, against the Steelers, who famously snubbed him, which is one of the reasons why they drafted Pickett this year. I don't care what anybody tells you. That's one of the reasons why they drafted Pickett. He throws for 400 yards, and that actually is still the highest scoring AFC Championship game ever. At 30-odd years, almost 40 years later, that still is. And he beat the Steelers. Yeah, 45-28, 73 points. Is
a total FU to Pittsburgh. Like, how dare
big
you?
FU. Oh, yeah. And they've never let it down. They've never really let that down. So, and I don't think Pickett's going to be Marino, with all due respect to him. So,
no, no, Kenny Pickett isn't. Yeah, all due respect to Kenny Pickett. He's
right. And we talk more about, running backs earlier. Ricky Waters with 66 catches in 94. Tony Nathan, a running back that year, had 61 receptions. So, Marino just, he played the game. And Don Shula, I think this is more of a credit to Shula as a coach. He won his back-to-back in the 70s with a running offense, with Greasy never throwing. He gets back to Super Bowl, a dozen years later with a quarterback that's throwing the ball a lot. So, I think that says something too, that Marino was able to get a running coach to throw the ball. A shame that he didn't end this with a championship, but he just so happened to run into Joe Montana and a Niners team. I think the 84 Niners is on the Mount Rushmore of NFL teams. So unfortunately, he ran into that buzzsaw. He still threw for 318 yards in that game, which was tied for second ever at that point. But this season has everything except for a ring. And that's why it's number one.
I know it's fascinating that the 3 top seasons ended in just brutal fashion. Not brutal.
Right.
I mean, 38-16 is a bloodbath. If you're thinking we just beat the Steelers 45-28 in the AFC Championship game, like we're gonna hang with whoever we play in the Super Bowl, and the Niners just stomped them. Same thing with like the 2013 Super Bowl. I remember Prisco. I remember sitting with Pete and talking about it. And it's like, I talked to myself in the Seahawks, then he started talking about the Broncos and how, like, he's like, this is what Peyton's going to do, blah, blah, blah. And I talked myself into picking the Broncos. It was basically a pick 'em. Nobody knew. It's supposed to be, these are supposed to be close games, right? Like, was the 84, I'm trying to think I don't know offhand what the 84 Super Bowl spread was, but I can look really quick.
The Niners were favored,
but favored by 3. Right. So
right.
53.5 total in 1984, and it went over. I mean,
the big storyline, the big narrative going into that game was that all the focus was on the Dolphins offense, and Bill Walsh, which I think, he doesn't get enough credit. He's all X's and O's, but he was a great motivator. And he laid in the locker room before the game, and he just sat back and goes, "Man, the Dolphins offense is so good. How are we going to stop them? Dan Marino's so proficient. How are we going to even, get a third down stop?" And he was doing it to rile them up. And he actually, pardon my language, he just got up for a second and said to the guys, "Boy, don't you just want to tear the wall down and kick their ass right now?"
Oh, God.
I mean, Walsh was just a monster.
Say ass all you want on here.
There we go. But it fired Montana up, and Montana played great in that game. And the Dolphins actually had an early lead, and then the Niners kind of put their foot down. But Marino played an era where the NFC won. I mean, actually, think about this. Never really thought about this. Marino's rookie year, for the next 13 years, the Super Bowl champion was on the NFC side.
Wow.
So and same thing with Elway. So 2 AFC great and Kelly, who also came in the league in 80, class of 83.
NFC was just hard, just tough and hardened.
Right. So it's almost like if you played in the NBA in the 90s. I mean, you weren't getting a ring because you had Michael Jordan.
You're on a list of people who lost to Michael Jordan.
Exactly. Right. So is Marino, I guess, is Charles Barkley. The greatest.
That's probably correct. Yeah.
Player didn't get a ring.
That's a good call. All right, you asked me what my favorite season was.
Yes.
Man, it's a really tough question. I mean, if I'm picking from this list, I'm probably going 2000. I'm probably going 2013 Manning, just because like I remember it so distinctly, and it was very early in like my career at CBS. And so, it's like you're covering, not like we're not still covering every game, but it's, like there's something to be said for, the newness of doing this job. Like,
Sure.
you're 2 years into like, holy crap. Like I'm like, is this why are they letting me do this? Like if you fooled, you feel like not like you fooled. It's just, but it just, it's a very happy, like it's a very happy part. Not like it's a very
almost.
It's a very surreal period.
It's one of the first significant things that's happening to you on the job. And you're going to look back and say, when I first came in, that was the Manning MVP season where he threw for all these yards. So you probably realized at that moment that like you're watching something in real time and you're going to be writing about something in real time that you're probably always going to remember as part of your career when you started at CBS.
Yeah. And like also too, 2000, so the 2013 season, make sure I got that. I'm 90% sure I'm right. Yeah, I mean, this is 100% right. Like the playoffs that year, the wild card, like that's when Rivers, like that's the weekend my son was born. It was a wild card weekend, So it's like, like the Rivers beat Dalton and the Bengals. I remember sitting in, the whole season was just very, like very, and then the New York Super Bowl, which was, the Super Bowl was a letdown, but it was like an awesome lead up to it. So there's just a lot of like, and it was just an incredible season for Manning, right? I mean, like his, he came back from the neck surgery. He's on a new team. He's got all, he's got his guy. It's just, it was a fun. I just remember it fondly, and so, and it's like fairly new. So I guess that would be my favorite of this list. I think it's appropriately placed.
Yeah, my season's not on the list.
What's yours, Terry Bradshaw?
No, unfortunately, no. It's one I remember, and it was 97. It was Cordell Stewart's first year starter, and actually, he's the first 3010 guy, first guy to throw for 3,000 yards in a season. And no, it was 2010. He's the first quarterback to throw for 20 touchdowns and rush for at least 10. And Cam Newton finally matched him in 2015 at Cam's MVP season. He matched him. That was
going to be the one I brought up next. It was going to be Cam 2015.
Okay, yeah, that was a cool season too. But for me as a young fan, I mean, that was probably the second year I really got into football. And you knew Cordell the first couple of years he was slash. Remember where he caught the ball and wasn't much of a quarterback. So, and I don't have kids yet, but I feel like watching Cordell that year is probably like when you're watching your kid for the first time play sports, where you're kind of seeing them grow. They have moments of setbacks where you're discouraged, and then there's moments where they have the aha moment. Like he had 2 5-touchdown performances that season, where he ran for 2 and threw for 3. Both games they faced these big deficits. So it was an up and down emotional roller coaster season, and it ended in heartbreak because they lost to Denver in the AFC Championship game, and largely because of his turnovers.
Ironically, like, so the Cam 2015 season. So, I mean, again, for like first 5 years of my career at CBS, it's my team, the Panthers. Like, I was always a big Cam guy. I got a lot of, like I did a lot of like radio, lot of radio, because it was like, all right, who, like, guy, even though I don't live anywhere near Charlotte, it's like North Carolina guy, for CBS, come, it's like, so like it helped to boost my profile. Cam's one of my favorite players of all time. Right. They were undefeated until week 16 when they lose the Falcons somehow. I consistently, I was on board the Panthers bandwagon early enough. So I was, people were like, oh, it's the worst 14-0 team of all time or whatever it was, and so I remember that, I covered the entire playoff run. Like I was down there for the Seattle game and the Cardinals, like the whipping of the Cardinals 49-15 in the NFC Championship game. I was out there.
And Seattle the week before.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, like I mean, a good Seattle team.
Right.
And then of course I was in San Francisco for the Super Bowl, which, ironically, it was Peyton Manning, I guess not ironic, but like, Denver destroyed the Panthers. So it was like, also like, just like a lot of these seasons, a very, bitter, close to it. I mean, like, but I think the Lamar season from 2019 is probably why you'll never see this Cam season get any love on a list like this, because
it was considered. His completion percentage that year kind of left him off.
59.8.
Right.
35 passing touchdowns, 10 rushing touchdowns, quote unquote, just 636 rushing yards.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was a.
Is he a Hall of Famer?
He probably won't get in, but I tend to think that he should.
Yeah, he's in my category of guys that are Hall of Fame talented players.
It's
like
just like he's so unique in what he's done or what he did. He's just not liked by enough people. I don't think.
I don't understand that. I don't understand the dislike. Like Ben's not well liked. Like I actually wondered. Like I thought he might be in that golf tournament with some of the quarterbacks recently because Ben loves golf too, and
right.
Ben's not liked by the large scope, and I understand why. I don't understand Cam. I know he's had some comments. I know that female reporter had that comment. Like I know he's had some moments that probably.
That's almost like more recently. It was like he wasn't like before. It's just it's a. I mean.
It probably stems from the Auburn stuff.
100%.
That's what it stems
and
from.
And other factors, which we don't have time to get into right now. But yes,
right.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's just why like people didn't like him from Jump Street, and he's always been sort of like a talented, out of nowhere villain type. I think, even though that wasn't how he wanted to be portrayed, which is right. It's kind of interesting. All right, that was good. Now I'm like could wax poetic about many more quarterback seasons, but I won't.
I'm going to use that word curb stomped in some stories here coming up, and I'll give you some credit. So
you Google CBSSports.com and curb stomped, you're probably getting 15 of my articles, probably more than that.
There we go. I'm looking forward to doing that.
All right, DeArdo, awesome stuff as always. Excellent breakdown of the top 10 quarterback seasons of all time. Go read it on CBSSports.com. Thanks for taking the time, buddy. We'll talk soon.
Yep. Thanks.